Hare Krishna, I'm Sesa Das, and welcome to Introduction to Ethics here at Bhaktivedanta College. I'll be your instructor online for this course, and I hope you enjoy it. It's always a lot of fun and thought-provoking as well. So let's just dive right in here. I want to mention that this is a philosophy course, and so there are some expectations I have of you, and I'm sure you have expectations of me. My one expectation is that you need to think. You have to become thinkers. That's what philosophers do, and that's what we're here to do. Now, I'm not to, and I don't intend to tell you what to think. That's up to you completely, as it should be. But we will be discussing some mechanisms that philosophers over time that have studied ethics have developed about how to think about ethical problems, moral dilemmas. And so we're going to talk about that. And our objective is to get to the why of thinking. Why is important in this course? Why do we think the way we do? And start questioning things like why be good? What is good, like that. Now, what we do to start this is I'm going to refer you to a video that you can go to online. It's by Simon Sinek. He's a UK author, motivational speaker, and he has about an 18-minute video where he talks about the golden circle, which is a concept he's developed, and the question why. And how that question is so important in people's lives that make a difference. Because people that think, philosophers, make a difference in society. That's our conviction, and that's what we're trying to convey in this course on ethics. And so I think that Simon Sinek's video is a good one to watch. You can watch that and then come back and pick up the narrative here. And that narrative, again, begins with this question, why? I do with the in-class students a writing exercise based on that, video about why. And it involves, you can see it on the screen there, a yoga studio, a teacher who has a dilemma about a personal problem that she has. Basically, she eats meat and she's coming to you to ask for your advice because she feels conflicted about being a yoga teacher and eating meat. And I asked the students, and I'm asking you also, again, offline, you have time, you can do this, that to write something, take about 10 minutes to write something. This person, this yoga teacher, is coming to you to ask for guidance, what she should do. So I want to know, and I want you to think about what you should say to her and why. Why is it important what you say to her? So that's an exercise because, again, that question is going to follow us throughout the course here, this why question. So look at that carefully. The purpose of this course is about you. Again, why do you think in a particular way? You think in a way that's different than me. I think in a way that's different than him. He thinks in a way that's different than her. Where does all this come from? Why are we different in our moral outlook on life, and how do we approach questions? That has to do with the first subject we want to cover, and that is this idea of a moral compass. Each of us in our own hearts has a mechanism that I call the moral compass, which guides us, especially in terms of making moral, ethical choices in life. So the question is, where does that come from? Well, it could come from a number of places. Society at large, your country. In the class that we're doing currently, the in-class session that we're doing, and currently we have a number of students from South Africa, different than me, who is from the United States. And so that difference is going to put us on different pages when we start talking about moral compasses and what I think is good and right and or is bad and wrong. So country makes a difference, society at large. We're devotees of Krishna, so that's also going to make a difference in how we see things, the type of family background we have and the type of friends. I generally put this question to the students and ask them, what do you think are some of the influences on your own moral compass? And we get back things like peer pressure is how one decides what's right and wrong, cultural conditioning, including just society at large, but also maybe the economic background you come from. All these things are impressions that are there within us that make us think about moral, ethical issues differently. And so we need to know a little bit about ourselves. If we're going to be philosophers, if we're going to study ethics, we need to know a little bit about ourselves and why we think the way we do about certain issues. Now, that implies that we need to be open to changing that. That's the purpose of education, actually, to educate our moral compass. Maybe we're going to have to reset it a little bit. But first it starts with knowing ourselves a bit. So I think that it's important that we take a look at that. We take a look at that, all these different factors that make up our being, particularly when it comes to moral and ethical choices in life. So that's a look at where we are. And you can take that writing exercise that we did about the yoga teacher and analyze it according to your own personal moral compass. But keep it, because you may find at the end of the course that that compass has changed a bit. Hopefully that will be the result of some of the exposure to ideas and why thinking that we're going to be doing here. So indeed, that is a purpose of the course. These are our course objectives, things that we're trying to accomplish here. These things are meant to change our moral compass, that we can go beyond our conditioning, if you will. So 5 course objectives that correspond to different issues here. First, we're talking about stimulating our moral imagination. Now, I have that spelled wrong there. I have Gari Love quota, but it's actually supposed to be quote. But there's a quote from one of the publications we use in the course here by a man named Gari Love, and he talks about sensitivity. In order to understand moral and ethical issues, to be able to imagine such a thing as an ethical problem or moral problem, we have to have a certain amount of sensitivity to us. You'll find as we go through these course objectives and the course as a whole, that there's a combination of things that we have to run across. Input from our sentiment and our feelings, as well as input from logic and reasoning. And so, first point is that we have to stimulate our moral imagination to be able to see and direct and feel what's right and wrong, good and bad. One of the things you'll see, you recall from the Simon Sinek video, was he talked about a certain type of reaction that's nonverbal. It's sort of a gut reaction. There's a part of our brain, a part of our heart that tells us this is right or this is wrong. a lot of what happens in life by peer pressure and things like that get our moral compass going one way or another is that people influence us to not hear that voice, to deny that moral imagination, how we can see things in terms of good and bad. And so the first thing is we have to stimulate that. And being a sensitive person, being able to understand the sufferings of others, for instance, is one of the objectives we have to sort of break through to that idea. Another is recognizing moral issues, sort of spotting issues in different situations. The ability to do that is important, and it's one of the things we teach in the course. I give an example of a few years ago there was a GBC issue that came up. One of the GBC members had been communicating with the father of a young man who was in Mayapur. And there was a situation developed there that some devotees, believe it or not, were involved in smoking marijuana, selling marijuana, etc. And so when the authorities became aware of this, naturally they kicked them out of Mayapur. Now, one of them happened to be a good mridanga player, and so one sannyasi wanted that service, and so he wanted to bring that boy back. And that boy said, well, I'm not coming back unless my friends come back. So the whole lot of them came back in. And then it presented a dilemma for youth that were in Mayapur that weren't doing this. How are these people allowed back in, and especially why are they allowed back in just because they're good mridanga players? And so the whole issue arose. What should the GBC do about this? And it may seem like a small thing, but actually I think it's significant because it involves these kind of moral choices, these why questions, which are so essential to our being successful in anything that we do. So what we do with this situation is, with the students, we look to see what kind of moral issues does this bring up. Does it bring up parent-child relationships, for instance, because some of the parents of these devotees, these young men that were doing this, are good devotees, and they may have struggled bringing up their children, so parenting becomes a moral issue here. The authority structure, given what Srila Prabhupada wanted, who's responsible, a whole host of issues surround these kind of decisions, and I think that we do ourselves benefit when we get good philosophical moral thinkers when they can see as many of these issues as possible, so that we get an idea to how to act based on a full view of the circumstances. So recognizing moral issues is something we'll do. Analyzing those things, this is the logic and reason part that I mentioned before, as opposed to the sensitivity or sentimentality of the moral imagination. We need to be able to use reason and be committed to reason. And there are reasons for this, as a way of speaking, particularly because we don't want to be dogmatic. If we take a position for or against something, but we say that it's on the basis of a set rules that are inside these set rules, and those rules can't be questioned or investigated or try to understand them, but we just accept them blindly, then we're acting dogmatically. And we can't be good philosophers if we have dogmatic points of views. And if we take dogmatic points of views, we can justify anything, whether it's truly moral or ethical or not. So we look at a commitment to reason, and that's a big part of what we study in the course. Personal sense of responsibility is important. You hear mentioned as stimulate a sense of responsibility. There's an interesting hypothetical situation we use here about a train coming down a track with your mother or other dear relative strapped to the track, and you're standing at a switch, and you can push the switch this way or that way and have the train go this way or that way. Basically trying to put you in a position where you have to make a choice, and you have to think about that choice. We're asking you to think about it. And so and I think we have here as the next slide some of the questions that might come up. Yeah. How do you feel after the accident? What's your responsibility in it? Are there differences in the value of lives involved? If the train goes one way, for instance, it may run over your relative. If it goes the other way, it's going to go off a bridge, and all the people on the train are going to be killed. Does the number of lives involved outweigh your personal relationship? Should it? Maybe it does, but the question is, should it? Why does it? Do we have a duty to our family over the lives of others? What if the lives that are lost in the train going off the bridge are all prisoners, convicts? Does that matter? All these types of questions should impact our own personal responsibility, and so we want to look at that in the course also. How we have a sense of responsibility and take that sense as a duty in executing our lives as moral and ethical people. And finally, of course, objectives center around dealing with moral ambiguity. As I mentioned earlier, my moral compass is going to be different than your moral compass. And that's going to cause some ambiguity when we both consider the same situation, or if we come into conflict, or if we seek agreement in different ways. What I think is good and just and moral is going to be different than what you think is good and must and moral, simply because we're people, and people differ in how their outlook on life. People are embodied, therefore they require protection. They can be injured, they can be hurt, and we have a duty, or do we have a duty, I should say, to protect against harm for all other human beings or other animals or plants as well. How broad do we go there? Because moral ambiguity arises. I'll give you an example. Some religions may say that the animals have no souls, and we say the animals have souls. And so when we come together to talk about ethical treatment to animals, then unless we can understand the differences and accept that my view is going to be different than your view, and seek some common ground, then we're going to have some ambiguity of what is actually moral or ethical to do. People are social as well, basically implying that we live together in communities, so there has to be some sharing of the benefits and burdens of society. How do we go about doing that? Do we tax the rich to serve the poor? Do we let the rich keep all the money and have no concern about the poor? All of these are ethical and social issues and moral issues that we need to explore, because people are social. And finally, people are rational. I think Srila Prabhupada gives an example in this regard about if you have two children and one of them has some mental challenges or something like that, do you love that child less and treat that child less and give that child less facility in life because they're less rational than your other child? No, you don't. But someone may question, how far do we go then in looking at the intelligence or the rational ability of people and treatment we give to them? I mean, we can look at Nazi Germany, for instance, thinking they're superior, more rational people than somebody else, and therefore they have the right to put the others in great harm. And so, or slavery, for instance, enslaving others Is it right to enslave others that are rational beings, that are free to think and have the ability to think? Are we not going to give them rights that they're due? So all these things are sources of moral ambiguity, and so we have to be able to, as it says in our slide here, how to deal with moral ambiguity as part of the course objectives. Okay, so let's move on to giving some definitions. All of this is preliminary ground building work. In the course, we are going to be studying the works of different philosophers, Western philosophers primarily, but naturally some of the Vaishnava attitudes, Vaishnava ideas will enter our discussions just because that's our moral compass. But we need to get some definitions here so that we're all on the same page. So morals, values, virtues, and ethics. What does all that mean? How are they different? And it's important to know the distinction between them, so we're going to spend a little time doing this. Morals or morality. These are rules and duties that govern our behavior as persons. And here are a few examples of that. It's a moral duty to not to hurt people, to be the gentleness and compassion particularly. It's a duty or a rule that we follow. Similarly, not to tell lies, for instance, or something like that. Truthfulness is a moral, is morality. And fairness, not taking more than your share. These things are examples of morality, which are rules and duties that we have in society, so that everyone can mutually benefit. Now, values are slightly different. These are states of affairs that are desired by and for people that we want to increase. Their goals, things we work towards. And these things are like health versus sickness. And I think you'll see that these things cut across all different cultural areas around the world. Wealth versus poverty, happiness in general, freedom, justice, respect for human rights. These are things that are goals that we work for in life because we see that they're valuable. They're valuable for human society. Think of those three things. People are embodied, people are social, and people are rational. Justice, fairness, respect for human rights. These things all involve people. And so what we desire for or aspire for in our society are our values. Again, slightly different than morals. Now, virtues, again, has a slight difference, and these are desirable conditions that people have for themselves and for the good functioning of society. Things like wisdom, courage, self-control, justice. Self-control, just think about that for a minute. Obviously, in a society of people where there are or may be limited resources, then things like greed and violence and self-indulgence, these things are the opposite of virtues. We would rather want self-control people, self-controlled people to be part of a society, to act virtuously in that way, to share with others. Now, strictly speaking, ethics is the study of all these three things. It's not. It's different from morality, virtues, and values in that ethics, when we do ethics, we study these things. And so what we do as philosophers, ethical philosophers, is we study morals, values, and virtues. And we come to conclusions about what is ethical behavior, how they work together or don't work together in practice. is our understanding of ethics. So that's a little bit about those definitions. Now, we do have some other definitions that we need to go over here. Again, the discipline of ethics is using reason and impartiality, but there's some limiting definitions on ethics that we should be familiar with, because the field is a little intricate and there's a lot of things that could trip us up when we're trying to understand and go through the analysis. So mainly we're going to talk about descriptive ethics, normative ethics, relativism, and absolutism. So here's a descriptive ethics statement. Muslim men may marry up to 4 wives provided that they are able to provide for them and treat them equally. Now it's there on the slide you're seeing, but if that wasn't there, I would ask you, what does this statement tell you? What kind of a ethical statement or conclusion can we draw just from the one sentence? Muslim men may marry up to 4 wives, provided that they are able to provide for them and treat them equally. It's simply a statement. It doesn't make any moral judgment. Just a statement, let's say almost like a value statement. It describes facts. This is what it says in the Muslim tradition, that you can marry up to 4 women provided you are able to provide for them equally. No judgment, good or bad, right or wrong. And you notice there's no inquiry in this statement into whether there actually is equal treatment or what the women have to say about it or whatever. It just describes the facts. Now, the danger here is that facts may be mistaken for values. And again, what are values? Let's go back to our definition. Values are specific states of affairs that are desired by people and for people that will increase the ends or goals of our society. A statement like this, it could be mistaken for a value statement that it's good that Muslim men may marry up to 4 wives, provided they treat them equally. So that may be, if we say it's good, it becomes a different type of a statement than the descriptive ethics statements that just states the facts. Now we'll understand how this works in conjunction with the other definitions if we look at them. Normative ethics, a normative ethical statement, is that a statement, it says here, it is always wrong to steal. Now what does that statement tell you? Well, it gives some value judgment here, doesn't it? It's saying that it's always wrong to steal, which is different than the previous statement. We're looking at examining the value and the reasoning behind a choice. Someone wants to steal, and we say it's always wrong to steal. We're giving them a normative ethics statement. But this also has problems. And the problem is that it can be challenged by another normative statement. I tell you it's always wrong to steal. You tell me no. It's not. It's right to steal on some occasions. Now, both of them are equally normal statements. One does not trump the other by simply making that kind of statement. But the problem is that someone probably is going to say, I'm going to say it's always wrong to steal. Someone's going to say, no, it's right to steal on some occasions. Or, as your teenager or my teenager may say, but everyone steals. but everyone steals. Why doesn't that make it all right then? It doesn't make it all right because you can't challenge a normative statement with a descriptive statement. But everyone steals is a descriptive statement. No judgment is being made. No judgment is being made. Just describing facts. Everyone steals. But that doesn't make it right. But people often will say that, but everyone does it, and somehow or another justify what they're doing being right. So normative ethical statements and descriptive ethical statements have this kind of interaction with one another, and we have to be very careful how we go from one to another in our logical thinking about what's good and bad, what's right and wrong. Another danger that we find with normative statements that make value judgments that we will be preaching rather than informing and considering all the consequences and values involved. A lot of fanatic type of preaching in all different religious denominations takes place in the name of this type of normative versus descriptive ethics background. The problem is particularly called by philosophers the is to ought problem. The is to ought problem. One ought to do that because this is something. Here's an example, descriptive. The majority of Americans approve of abortion. Descriptive, no judgment made. No, abortion is right. You have a normative statement. You're putting a value on the action. It's normative description. And so what's the fallacy? Therefore, it's right for you to have an abortion, or you ought to have an abortion. Now that's a fallacy. It doesn't flow from this discussion, but it can result, and it can result in some terrible actions in the name of what's right, or if we don't understand the distinctions between a normative statement and a descriptive statement and how we can't rationally, logically proceed from a descriptive statement like the majority of Americans approve of abortion to therefore abortion is right, therefore you ought to have an abortion. There's a fallacy in that logic, and as philosophers we should be aware of it in our own thinking and aware of it in others' thinking to try to help them not get caught. So that's one ethical, not ethical, but logical background we have to investigate these things. And next is it's a kind of consistency. Consistency is a logical a tool for analysis, and there are 4 parts of consistency that we're going to look at in this course to make sure that we don't fall into fallacies in reasoning here either. They are 2 on the first slide: logicality, ends, means, and conscientiousness and impartiality. So to look at these, I want to use the example of Maharaj Dasarath and his dilemma. Maharaj Dasarath had a dilemma that he was asked by his queen Kaikeyi to banish Ram to the forest for 14 years and to install her son. We're not going to get into how that all came about, except for the fact that she was asking on the basis of a promise Dasarath made to her, and she was challenging him, is he going to keep his word? Is he going to keep his word? So Dasarath was faced with that challenge. So we're going to analyze that according to these 4 kinds of consistency. Okay, number one. Don't believe logically incompatible things. So Dasarath is being challenged. Is he believing or accepting logically incompatible things? Well, if Dasarath says, I believe one should honor his word, and that's what he was doing, considering Kaikeyi's request, then what would be a violation of that logicality? If that's his logic, I believe and a man should honor his word, then can he logically not banish Ram? He told Kaikeyi he would give her the boon. She asked for the boon. She tested him. He repeated it. So obviously he was firmly convinced that I believe a man should honor his word. So then, logically, according to logicality, he would have to banish Ram. Because if he didn't banish Ram, then he would be acting in a way that's incompatible with his belief. So that's a fallacy in logic, that we can't believe in something without accepting what logically follows from it. So he believes that a man should honor his word, so therefore he had to banish Ram. Otherwise, he'd be acting illogically. Ends means rationality. You have to keep your means, what you're trying to accomplish, how you're trying to accomplish something, in line with what you're trying to accomplish. And again, on the example on Dasarath, he says that I want to install Ram. Why? Because Ram is a righteous king. That was his end. Now, the means to get there may be stated as, to install a righteous king, I must be righteous myself. Otherwise, how am I going to know what a righteous king is? So that's the means of getting toward the end. But if he didn't banish Ram, then he would not be keeping his means in line with the end. Because how could he be considered a righteous king if he couldn't keep his word? So the ends means rationality is there. What we want to accomplish has to be in line with how we accomplish it. Otherwise, we're going to find ourselves in all kinds of difficulty. And these things are going to take a little bit to go over. So in your materials, these things should be there, and you can study them more than we're going to devote to time here online. Okay, conscientiousness. Conscientiousness. Keep your actions and resolutions and desires in harmony with your moral beliefs. This is an important thing because it's more of an internal kind of logic that I think is a symptom of a sane person. I mean, someone that's insane is not going to be able to keep the what's inside in line with what's outside in their lives. So Dasarath has made the conscious choice that breaking one's word is wrong. Otherwise, why is he going through such a dilemma in the first place? It wouldn't be a dilemma if he didn't care about that deeply inside. So the correct action would be for him to act on that moral judgment that he's made, on that moral belief that he has. Now, if he doesn't do that, then he's not a conscientious person. And I think for any conscientious person, for any person, all of us included, we should be that conscious about what we're doing so that we keep our actions in line with our moral beliefs. Otherwise, as I said, anything can be justified. We want to try to avoid that. Finally, impartiality. Make similar evaluations about similar actions regardless of the individuals involved. This is one that, if we go back to the railroad track example we were talking about a little while ago, we had your mother or some loved one on one side of the track and people on the other side of the track, and a person that's impartial is required to act the same regardless of the relationships. That's one thing that a lot of the philosophers we will study have talked about, although I must admit there are newer or later ethical philosophies that differ with this idea that relationships don't matter and impartiality is so important. So we're going to just leave it with the impartiality right now, but we're going to come back later in the course and look at some theories that say that partiality does matter, and it's not just impersonal way of looking at things. So impartiality, make similar evaluations about similar actions regardless of the individuals involved. So mantra is lying to you, Kaikeyi. Dasarath could have said that. But if he says, therefore, there's no need to follow her, that is a partial statement, because essentially he's already said he's going to keep his promise to banish Ram. And now he's saying that although Mantra lied to you, you don't have to follow her, but if I lie to you, then you should follow me. He's conflicted in, he's not impartial in his analysis of lying. He accepts it, he expects it to be accepted on behalf of himself, but not of Mantra. So these are four kinds of consistency which are based in logic and that we'll use in the course to understand something about ethics. Okay, so that's what we'll cover in the first session today. We'll go on to the second session tomorrow, talking about subjects, moral reasoning strategy. We'll go over moral reasoning strategy, as well as maybe get into a little bit of one of the first theories we're going to study, divine command theory.